Like any other weekend, the store was bustling with families and shoppers. I had come to Walmart with a short list of essentials, and of course, Michael, my 5-year-old, was accompanying me. Michael always enjoyed these outings, hopping from aisle to aisle, enamored with the brightly colored toys. It was our little weekend ritual. I'd let him wander a little while I shopped, always keeping him in my peripheral vision. He knew the rule: don't stray too far from Mommy. As I examined the nutrition labels on cereal boxes, Michael was engrossed with a toy car he found on a lower shelf. I smiled, knowing it would be tough to get him to leave it behind when we moved to the next aisle. Answering an unexpected call from my boss, I let my focus drift momentarily. When I turned back, the toy car was there, but Michael wasn't. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly scanned the adjacent aisles, expecting him to emerge from behind a display or come giggling out from an attempt to play hide-and-seek. But there was no sign of him. "Michael," I called out, my voice a tad more panicked than I intended. Walking swiftly, I checked each aisle, looked behind the end caps, and even ventured towards the electronics section, Michael's other favorite spot. But he was nowhere to be seen. The weight in my chest grew heavier. I approached a store employee, a young woman restocking shelves. "Excuse me, I can't find my son. He's 5, wearing a blue shirt and has brown curly hair. Have you seen him?" The employee looked concerned but shook her head. "No, ma'am, but let's page him over the intercom." As we headed to the customer service desk, my mind raced with the worst possible scenarios. I assured myself that he's just playing a game or got distracted by another toy. A soft voice came over the intercom. "Michael, your mother is looking for you. Please come to the front of the store." I stood there, eyes fixed on the store entrance, hands wringing my shopping list to shreds. And then, finally, I spotted him. Michael was walking slowly from the back of the store, holding the hand of an older lady with silver hair. As they approached, the lady said, "I found him near the restroom. He seemed lost." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaky, tears of relief threatening to spill. I bent down to hug Michael, but he flinched. His eyes, once lively and full of mischief, now seemed distant. He looked at me, but it was as if he was looking right through me. "Michael, are you okay? Why did you wander off?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze darted around anxiously and he pulled away from me. Confused, I took his hand, but his grip was limp. We began to make our way to the checkout, leaving the older lady with a thankful nod. I looked down at Michael. The mischievous gleam in his eyes was gone. The energy he exuded moments ago had vanished. But it wasn't until we were in the checkout line that I truly understood the depths of the change in my child. In the checkout line, Michael stood as still as a statue. I tried to engage him, pointing out the candies and trinkets near the register, toys he would usually pester me to buy. But he didn't even glance at them. Then, something triggered him. He began screaming, a high-pitched, piercing scream that I had never heard come from him before. He thrashed about, trying to break free from my grip. The entire line turned to look, some with expressions of concern, others with visible annoyance. I tried to calm Michael, holding him close and whispering soothing words into his ear, but it seemed to make things worse. The more I tried to pacify him, the louder and more aggressive his tantrums became. A store employee approached. "Ma'am, is there anything I can do to help?" I shook my head, embarrassment and worry evident on my face. "I'm so sorry, I don't know what's gotten into him. He's never acted like this." As I tried to exit the line, hoping a change of scenery might help, Michael abruptly stopped screaming. His body went limp, and he seemed to stare intently at a security monitor that displayed CCTV footage. On the screen, shoppers moved about, and there was the familiar scene of the store's restroom entrance. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the monitor, replaying a scene from moments ago, was Michael, not with the old lady who'd brought him to me, but with a man. They were standing close to the restrooms, the man leaning down, whispering something into Michael's ear. He had a stern look, and I noticed a brief but distinct gesture. A finger placed on his lips, signaling Michael to stay quiet. The older lady appeared moments later on the footage, approaching Michael, and the man quickly disappeared out of the frame. My mind raced. Who was that man? What had he said to my son? Panic and dread filled me as the realization hit that the old woman had found Michael after this encounter, not before. Whatever transpired in those fleeting moments had deeply affected my child. Clutching Michael close, I swiftly made my way out of the store. As we reached the exit, his anxious demeanor returned. He tugged at my hand, looking over his shoulder repeatedly, as if expecting someone to follow. We sat in the car for what felt like ages, and as I drove home, my mind buzzed with questions. What had transpired in the store? What had the mysterious man said or done to cause such a drastic change in my son? I knew I needed answers, and fast, for the sake of my child. The drive home was tense. Every now and then, Michael would mutter something under his breath, too soft for me to understand. I tried asking him gentle questions about the man he had encountered, but he remained largely unresponsive, only occasionally whispering. He said to be quiet. Once home, I made him a warm bath, hoping it would calm his nerves and help bring back the spirited boy I knew. As he sat in the tub, playing half-heartedly with his toys, I decided to gently ask him again. "Michael," I began softly, kneeling beside the bathtub, "can you tell Mommy who that man was? Did he say something to you?" Michael looked at me, his eyes welled up with tears. "He said he's watching," he murmured. "Watching? Watching what, sweetie?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Us. Watching us, Mommy." This wasn't a casual threat. The man's demeanor, the intensity in his gaze that I saw in the CCTV footage, told me he was serious. I remembered Michael looking over his shoulder as we left the store, as if he expected the man to follow. Could it be that he really was watching us? Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to return to Walmart the next day, hoping to retrieve more footage or perhaps recognize the man if he frequented the store. I left Michael with my sister, not wanting to expose him to that environment again so soon. Back at the store, I approached the manager, explaining the situation and my concerns. He was understanding and allowed me to view more of the security footage. We spent hours scanning the tapes, trying to pinpoint any other appearances of the man or perhaps identify a vehicle he might have used in the parking lot. After what felt like an eternity, we found something. The same man loitering near the entrance a week before, observing families as they entered and left. It seemed he was particularly interested in those with children. It became evident that this wasn't a chance encounter. He had been scouting, and Michael had unfortunately caught his attention. The manager assured me they would keep an eye out for the man and notify security. He also suggested that I inform local law enforcement, just in case. As the days went by, Michael slowly returned to his normal self. With the help of a counselor and lots of love and reassurance from family, he began to open up more about the incident. The man, it turned out, had simply whispered a threat about always watching him and to keep silent about their interaction. Months passed without any sightings or incidents. Life began to feel normal again. We changed our routines, chose a different store for our weekly shopping, and took extra precautions. Then, one day, a news story broke. A man had been arrested for stalking families in various department stores. The mugshot displayed was all too familiar. It was him. A little relief washed over me. My son's trauma wasn't for nothing. Perhaps our ordeal had inadvertently led to the capture of someone who could have harmed others. With the last of the shoppers gone, and the muffled sounds of the cleaning crew in the distance, the atmosphere inside Walmart became eerily quiet. My heart raced as I prepared to execute the challenge I'd been daring myself to do for weeks. The 24-hour overnight stay in Walmart. Setting my camera on a self-standing tripod, I did a quick introduction. "Hey guys, it's Jake, and tonight I've got a sick challenge for you all. I'm going to be attempting the 24-hour challenge inside Walmart's electronics section. Trust me, it's going to be legendary." I had stashed my gear behind the shrubs in the garden center earlier in the day, taking extra care to ensure no employees noticed. As I retrieved them, I detailed the items to my viewers on my phone. "All right, here's the rundown. We've got some snacks. Chips, soda, candy bars. Gotta keep that energy up, you know? A blanket because, well, it can get chilly. And of course a flashlight, though I'll try to avoid using it as much as possible. Don't want to get caught after all." Finding an empty refrigerator box that I had scouted earlier, I climbed in. peering through a small opening to see the electronics section outside. My heart raced with adrenaline. This was it. The box was only just big enough to fit in, but would have to do for the rest of the challenge. I intermittently recorded whispering updates into my phone's camera. I showcased my cozy setup, munching on chips and giving silent thumbs-ups. The thought of the views and subscribers this video would get kept my spirits high. However, as the hours ticked by, I felt more isolated, the weight of silence pressing around me. I could feel the box becoming pretty airless quite quickly, so I opened the cardboard flaps on one of the ends a little to let more air in. Around what must have been midnight, I began to hear noises. Soon it became apparent that these were not the typical noises of the store after hours. I strained my ears, thinking perhaps it was just an employee doing late-night inventory. But the steps were irregular, sometimes fast, other times dragging, creating a rhythmless, unpredictable pattern. Whispers began to thread through the air, voices low and distorted. I couldn't really make out what they were saying. Panic bubbled up. I forced myself to remain calm, reminding myself of the challenge. It's probably just the ventilation or maybe the PA system acting up, I thought. As I attempted to calm my racing heart, the noises grew closer and more pronounced. Shuffling of items, aisles away at first, but steadily approaching. Suddenly, the environment around my box changed. The faintest ambient light that I had been using as my guide was snuffed out completely. A suffocating darkness enveloped me, and then a scraping sound, like gorilla tape being unrolled. The box's opening was suddenly sealed shut, each strip of tape like a hand smothering any hope of escape. I was trapped with my airflow quickly being cut off. Panic surged, and I banged on the sides of the box. Then a massive weight pressed down on the box, compressing my chest, making breathing difficult and movement impossible. Pain shot through my body. Panic evolved into sheer terror. My screams were stifled by the confined space. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't catch a breath. And then a voice, cold and emotionless.
I always find them, you know. Those that try to hide.
Gathering every ounce of courage, I managed to croak. Who are you? A chilling pause.
Someone who doesn't like games.
The weight lifted slightly, enough for me to breathe but not move. The box was dragged, and I could feel the ground beneath it transitioning from the smooth interior to the uneven floor outside. The box was ripped open. A cleaner stood there, his face obscured by shadows, but the menace in his stance evident.
Next time, kid, think twice before you try a silly game in my store.
Terror still coursing through my veins, I nodded vigorously. The janitor's dark silhouette faded as he walked back into the store, leaving me in the cold, silent parking lot. The challenge was over. Walmart seemed eerier at night. It's different when the halls aren't filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the bustle of customers. That's what I thought every time I started my shift. Tonight, as I started my round, I noticed the absence of the familiar sounds, the slight buzzing of the electronic doors, and the distant hum of the air conditioning units. There was a peculiar silence that loomed over the vast premises, and it was palpable. I passed through each aisle, the light from my flashlight dancing off the products, creating long, distorted shadows. As I moved through the grocery section, I followed it into the back to reach the massive cold stores. These stores hold the majority of the frozen produce before it gets transported to the freezers at the front of the store. Naturally, I felt the chill of the air, but the closer I got, the more I became aware of faint, indistinct whispers. They were almost too soft to catch, but they were there. As I approached one particular freezer, the whispers became clearer. They sounded like hushed voices, muttering in distress, followed by a muffled cry for help. For a moment I stood frozen, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But the voices persisted. I grabbed the freezer handle, hoping to open it and confront whatever or whoever was inside. To my surprise, the door wouldn't budge. I tried the other freezer doors as well, but they all remained locked. Determined, I went to the security room and rummaged for the master key set, hoping that one of them would unlock the freezer. After several failed attempts, I finally found the right key. With a deep breath and my flashlight ready, I inserted the key, turned it, and slowly opened the freezer door. Empty. Nothing inside but the usual rows of frozen goods. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Maybe the sounds were just in my head. Maybe the previous guard stories had gotten to me. But before I could further ponder the strangeness of it all, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to step inside to ensure there wasn't anyone hiding behind the towering shelves. But the moment I set foot inside, the freezer door shut behind me. I rushed to the door, tugging the handle with all my might, but it was locked from the outside. Panic surged through me, and as the temperature dropped rapidly, my breath turned to white puffs in the frosty air. I was trapped. But then I remembered there is always an emergency door release in these walk-in freezers for exactly this worst-case scenario. It was blocked behind a ton of boxes over on the far right of the door, so I rushed to get them moved. The glorious green button hung there, and I pushed it with relief. Nothing happened. I punched it again and again. No sound and no door release. I felt utterly devastated. I really was trapped. The cold was relentless. Every breath became a labor, each inhale a sharp sting, and exhale forming a puff of mist that seemed to hang suspended in the air before me. My flashlight, my only companion in this suffocating darkness, cast an eerie glow over the frost-covered packets and boxes. Its beam, though comforting, also revealed the icy tomb I found myself imprisoned within. I tried to keep my thoughts focused, shaking away the drowsy, numbing sensation that was slowly creeping over me. The thought of freezing to death in a supermarket freezer was both ironic and terrifying. I remembered reading somewhere that hypothermia first felt like an overwhelming desire to sleep. I had also read that these freezers could get to -40 degrees. I had to resist the cold. In a desperate attempt to stay warm, I started moving the frozen food packages, building a makeshift barricade between me and the cold floor. The idea was to use them as insulation, but the chill was omnipresent, and every item I touched felt like a brick of ice. Remembering the door, I continuously pounded and kicked at it, trying to make enough noise for anyone to hear. But the heavy insulation muffled my cries. My voice became hoarse, my hands and feet aching with cold and exertion. It was becoming increasingly evident that breaking out was not an option. My best bet would be to wait and hope that someone would eventually come looking for me. Time felt distorted. I began to lose sensation in my extremities. My fingers and toes first, then my hands and feet. The numbness crept upwards, threatening to engulf me. The weight of my eyelids became unbearable. The danger of drifting into unconsciousness loomed large. I tried everything to keep awake. I slapped my face, pinched my arms, even tried singing aloud, though my voice came out as a broken whisper. But time dragged on. A new fear began to set in. What if the morning shift did not come in today? What if something had happened and the store remained closed? The thoughts swirled in my mind, each more delirious than the other. In a last-ditch effort, I decided to conserve the remaining battery of my flashlight. I turned it off, plunging myself into complete darkness. The blackness was almost comforting. It felt as if the absence of light somehow made the cold a little less intense, a tiny bit more bearable. All I could hear was the muffled hum of the freezer machinery and my own increasingly labored breaths. Huddled up, I kept telling myself to stay awake, to fight the cold, to survive. This wasn't how my story was going to end. Not here, not like this. My mind started to drift amidst the unyielding cold. Memories, warm and distant, surfaced. The laughter of loved ones, sunlit afternoons, the gentle warmth of a summer's day. Each one a brief respite from the biting cold of my confinement. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness because at one point, a dull, repetitive noise pulled me from the depths of my frosty haze. At first I thought it was a figment of my imagination, but then I recognized it. The unmistakable sound of the store's PA system starting up for the day. The initial feedback buzz, followed by the soft hum as it awaited announcements. The store was opening. I gathered every ounce of strength left in me, and with a raspy voice I began to shout. Again and again I called out, my voice weak but persistent. Moments turned into agonizing minutes, but just when I thought the darkness would claim me for good, I heard another sound. Footsteps. They were distant but growing louder. Hope surged through my veins, every shout becoming more desperate than the last. The footsteps drew closer until they stopped right outside the freezer. Suddenly, a rush of warm air hit me as the door was yanked open. The blinding light from the store flooded in, silhouetting a figure. It was Keith, the store manager, his face a mix of shock and relief. "Good God," he exclaimed, rushing to help me up. "We saw the security footage, saw you come in here and never come out. I can't believe it." I could barely respond, my body shaking uncontrollably, the sudden warmth almost as painful as the cold had been. Keith quickly wrapped me in his jacket and helped me out of the freezer. As I sat in the break room, slowly sipping on a hot cup of coffee, Keith explained how he'd reviewed the CCTV footage after realizing I hadn't checked in with him that morning. He'd watched as I entered the freezer, the door closing ominously behind me. The warmth of the room, the concern on Keith's face, and the lingering sensation of that bone-chilling cold. It all felt surreal. The harrowing night in the freezer had been a brutal reminder of life's fragility. Days turned into weeks, and the incident became a cautionary tale among the staff. There were many discussions and checks put in place to ensure no one would ever be trapped like that again.